Lorraine mentioned something earlier when she was giving the preliminaries about always checking ingredients. Have you ever examined the ingredients on the healthful bread?
It's not healthy at all.
And you see all these strange words and names and something added for
Preservative.
preservative.
That's why it lasts
and-
forever.
Yeah. And you can't help but wonder, is this really healthful? Just as Lorraine was talking about the burgers, if you make your own,
You know what?
you know what's in it. And I only started making our own bread, 2 or 3 years ago. Up until then, every time we went to Winco, we'd stock up on healthy bread. But I always wondered, am I really getting what I think I'm getting? I think all of us are aware that whole wheat or whole grain breads are more nutritious than the kind that is enriched. They strip off all the goodies and then they add back just a little bit of it, and then they sell it to you as enriched bread. This is better than the original because look at what we've added to it. Yeah, sure. So anyway, we got a bread maker.
Ghost bread.
It's a Hamilton Beach. Had a good rating. Then I discovered something rather troubling. Didn't discover it right away. Took a little while. But I discovered that all bread makers have a weak spot, a weak link. And it's the bushing right in here. Don't know whether you can see that moving in and out. When I first got this bread maker, this was so tight sometimes that in order to get it started, before I put anything in here, I would turn it around, and sometimes in order to break it loose and get it to turn. Now, it spins very freely, and that's a problem. And it's a problem because the manual that came with the bread maker says always put the liquid in first.
Okay.
And I discovered, when I picked this up, some of the liquid would be down here.
Yeah.
You can.
And when I saw that, I started looking to see if other brands had the same problem, and they did. It's a weak link. I think it's a nylon bushing, and it wears over time. And I started looking to buy a replacement. This little thing here. Want to guess how much?
Too much.
About $45 or $50. So I got to thinking, well, first of all, I thought, okay, that's dropping down. That's what's the problem. So I used a couple of washers to put where this would fit, to hold it up so that it's not going to drop down and let stuff leak out. That seemed to help. but it wasn't the entire solution. So what I ended up doing, and I've done this now for 2 or 3 months, what I ended up doing, I mix, instead of mixing everything in here, you know, they tell you dump in your liquids, then dump in your dry ingredients. Last of all, add your yeast. That's what they say. Well, I don't do it that way anymore. What I do is start with my dry ingredients, but I don't put them in there. I put them in a bowl. And I'll just quickly go through the steps. One, 2, 3, 4, 1/2. Often, at this point, I'll just grab a paper towel and wipe these out. I'm not going to do the job here because it's going to get on here, I'm afraid.
Well, it doesn't matter, that's gonna get washed anyway.
But anyway, I kind of like the idea of not having anything that needs to be washed up when I'm finished. And so I just try to keep it taken care of as I'm going along. So, ingredient 1 is in. Next ingredient is gluten.
Honey, put the big one away.
No, it's fine.
See you. You can't see behind the big
Put it on the floor.
container.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay, sorry about that. Next thing is what we normally refer to as gluten flour. The bread making machine, people call it vital wheat gluten. As far as I know, there's no difference.
No difference.
And so I just put 1, 2, that. The reason you need the vital wheat gluten is particularly with whole grains. It gets heavy. It's a heavier dough, and apparently the vital wheat gluten helps that bread to that heavier.
It gives it more elasticity.
Okay, that's the word I was looking for. I didn't know it, but that's the word. Next, since I am vegan, instead of what they call for
Powder milk.
what is it, low fat,
Non-fat.
Yep.
non-fat, dry milk. I use soy milk powder. 1, 2. And then, I don't put my yeast in yet. I put my secret ingredients in. And you'll notice on the sheet, I say you don't have to use these. You can use one or all, or experiment with other things. I have yet to find anything that ruined the batch. Some of them may be more desirable than others, but they're all good. By the way, as far as the flour is concerned, you can replace up to 1 cup of that with, say, rye flour or other whole grain flour. For a while, I was regularly using 1 cup of rye flour and 3.5 cups of whole wheat flour. But then I like this so well that I've stopped doing that. So what is this? Garlic and parsley. One tablespoon. Dill weed. Kind of hard to get 1 tablespoon. It's always a heaping tablespoon. This was something I started using more recently because I wasn't even familiar with this before. Everything bagel.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And you can even get that in Winco's bulk
In
now,
bulk.
which makes it very economical. By the way, I used to think that I needed to buy, trying to think of the name of that company out in Portland area.
Bob's Red Mill?
Red Mill. Bob's Red Mill. I used to think you had to get something like that for the flour. I use the bulk from Winco. They have Bob's Red Mill there, but I use the regular whole wheat flour there, half the price of Bob's Red Mill, and as far as I'm concerned, it's just as good.
It's just the price that differs.
Pardon me?
You're paying for the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just paying for the name.
Yeah.
Garlic and herb. And if you think it's starting to sound like garlic bread, you ought to smell it when it's baking.
Yeah, you think the smell of bread baking, but all you smell is garlic.
It smells delicious, it really does. I used to put the salt into the liquid to dissolve. But that was when I could still put the liquid in to begin with. I don't do that now. Where'd I put my spoons? I don't use as much salt as the recipe called for. I use kind of a heaping quarter teaspoon. I find that that's sufficient.
This says half.
Pardon me?
You put half here.
Change it to quarter. I use this small one usually. You do need some salt. They say that the salt and the sugar content are very important for the yeast to do its job. And if you don't have any salt in, they claim that your yeast overreacts and the salt helps to control that. Yeast. In their recipe, they called for 2 teaspoons of yeast, or these little packets. You buy these little packets, and it seems like it was about $1.50 for 4 of these little packets, something like that, last time I looked. I recommend this type of yeast. Safe Instant, or Saf Instant, La Safre. And the reason I recommend it is because I bought a pound of this, At Kessler's in Blackfoot, I bought a pound of this. I think it was about $5. I have already made probably at least 8 or 10 batches out of that pound. And you can see how much is left. When it was new, it was right up to the top. So, you know, I'm sure that I'm going to get at least 50 or 60 batches out of this. $5 instead of $1, probably running somewhere around close to $1 per batch for yeast if I bought it the other way. Obviously, if you're only going to make one batch for Christmas and another batch for 4th of July, then buy it in the packets. One thing you do need to do, you need to keep this refrigerated. Another thing, it called for 2 tablespoons, teaspoons, 2 teaspoons. And you remember the cratering I showed you? I got to wondering, what's causing this? Because it wasn't always that way. Sometimes it would rise very nicely and it wouldn't crater. But what seems to be happening, you know, it'll rise very nicely. I'll look at it 5 minutes before it's finished, look through the glass plate there, look at it. It's nice, rounded, looks lovely. All of a sudden, craters. And so I wondered, maybe it needs more yeast. Maybe I'm not putting enough yeast in. But before experimenting, I decided, well, who is it you always ask questions of?
Auntie Google.
Auntie Google. Auntie Google. And it's very counterintuitive, at least it seems so to me. But Auntie Google said, use less yeast when that happens. And apparently the science behind it is that if your yeast is working too fast, puffs up like this, and then it runs out of the sugar to feed on,
And it collapses.
and it collapses.
It does that too when, if you proof it too long. If you let it go too long, it'll, for the same reason, it uses up all the sugar and it'll fall before you punch it down and put it for its second proof.
Now, you notice I haven't put any sugar in this yet. And the reason for that is that I don't use sugar. I use honey. I think that contributes to the flavor. I don't like to use a lot of sugar. Honey has a lot of sugar in it, but it's not just sugar. And maybe it's just, maybe I'm just fooling myself when I think that I'm getting something more healthful when I use honey rather than sugar. But anyway, I haven't put any sugar in it because that goes in the liquid ingredients when I use honey. And my liquid ingredients,
You haven't put your yeast in yet.
I'm just thinking, I haven't put that yeast in yet. Thank you.
You would
I
have
was-
very densely.
I was going to tell you why I'm not using 2 teaspoons. I'm using a half a tablespoon. A half a tablespoon is 7.5 milliliters.
It's a teaspoon and a half.
A teaspoon is 5 milliliters. 2 teaspoons is 10 milliliters. I'm using 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. And last time when I did that, didn't have any cratering. This time, well, you saw there was some cratering. Not as bad as it has been at times, but there was some cratering. And I'm thinking that maybe I need to remove just a little bit of water out of my 1 3/4 cups of water. And when I make this batch, I'm going to try that. I like this particular 2-cup measure because unlike another one we have that's kind of opaque, this one I can get down and look at the line and see what is it, that's surface tension on the water, you know? I can see exactly where it is. And I know with this batch that you sampled today, I know that with that batch, it was exactly at 1 3/4 cups, because even though it was very early morning, I got up at 5 o'clock to start that batch this morning. But even though it was early in the morning, I was awake enough that I could see exactly where that line was. It was right on. So my assumption, there are two causes, two potential causes for that cratering. One is an excess of water, and the other is an excess of yeast. And I'm hesitant to cut the yeast back any more than I've already cut it back before I try taking a little bit of the water out. And so I think what I'm going to do, I'll get it where it's right on, and then I'll take maybe a tablespoon of water out of it. Just decrease it slightly and see if that makes a difference. That's one of the...
Still haven't put the yeast in.
You guys have only a crater if you don't get that
Yeast in there.
yeast in there.
It's gonna end up with a very dense.
Peter is so worried that that bread is not gonna come out right.
There.
We saw it now.
There, it's in there now. Now, I haven't seen anywhere where they suggest this, but I now fluff it up. I mix it up, but at the same time, it's fluffing it up. I think that's part of why it seems to bake so well. At least ways I can tell myself that I helped it that way.
He's enjoying himself there.
Now, I'm not going to do this because I don't want to add the liquid to it until I get home. You know, obviously, I can't start it here and then stop it and take it home. You know, I have no idea what I'd end up with, but it probably wouldn't be a loaf of bread.
A doorstop.
But
We can use it for self-defense.
possibly. But here's what I do. Here's how I get around the leaky bottom. I take this dry ingredient, I put about half of it in here. Make sure that it very well covers the bottom, and I usually get it up about to the top of the paddle. Now, when it's full, you know, it's going to be up like this before it raises. When it raises, it gets up close to the top here. But I put about half of that in there. Then I do the liquid bit. Well, I've already told you what I do in terms of the water. To other liquid ingredients.
Honey?
Honey
Here's my
and olive oil. When I first started doing this, I would follow their instructions and I'd get out my tablespoons and so much in a tablespoon, etc. I got to thinking, now this doesn't make any sense. No sense at all. When I calculated it, I realized that about equal amounts of each of these, and when I added the two together, it equaled a third of a cup. In other words, 1/6 of a cup of this and 1/6 of a cup of this. And I said to myself, my eye is good enough that I can tell approximately half this cup. So I put half, fill the cup half full of olive oil. And then the rest of the way with honey. You know, these honey jars have a very tiny opening, and I got tired of waiting and squeezing and waiting and squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. I discovered I open it up like this in about in about a quarter of the time, or even less.
Discovery.
I've got my honey in there. And I get it so that it's just almost ready to spill. I've learned through experience, it's well to have something under it just in case I didn't stop quite soon enough and it does spill. But put the water in, put this in. Where's my spatula? Yeah, I've got a spatula around here somewhere. Clean out, because some of the oil and sugar, honey is going to stay in there.
And
Then,
always put the oil in first because the honey sticks to it better.
yes, yes. The oil helps to make it easier to get the honey out. Not as good as I thought it would, but a whole lot better than if I did it the other way around. Then, of course, I've got half of this batch. I scrape it back into here on top of the liquid. I take this, put it in there. This particular bread maker calls for cycle number 11 for whole grain. It's a longer cycle because it is a whole grain bread. You'll have to check whatever bread maker you're using. They'll tell you what cycle you need to use for the whole grain. Put it in there. One more important concern. Don't let it be close to the edge of your counter.
It's walking. Yep.
If you look at this closely, you can see it has been glued. It went off the counter once on me, and actually the reason that's not going down quite well is because I've got the cord tucked in there. But it still does the same job, but I had to take it all apart and straighten out the pin that ran through it, these things do cost $100, $120, I take an hour of my time to straighten out the pin and glue it back together. And that is all you have to do until the time is up. And
So will it raise inside and then?
it raises
starts to-
inside.
Everything.
It goes through 2 cycles. Well, first of all, it takes 15 minutes of kneading. And during that time, about 5 minutes into it or 7, I take the ladle, the spatula, here it is. I take the spatula. You will find, if you look in here, that there's some that's kind of worked up along the edges, and it's not getting into the ball that's forming. I suppose it would eventually take care of itself.
Sometimes not.
Sometimes not. Anyway, I take the spatula and just push that down into the ball. Only takes half a minute. And then I leave it for 3 hours.
How long?
3 hours.
Does it goes through 2 rising cycles like
Yes.
normal? Yeah.
Yes. Goes through 2 rising cycles, and then it starts baking. And that's when you start smelling those delicious odors. And the proof is in the eating, as they say.
Yeah.
So, any questions?
That was a very thorough presentation. Thank you, Harold.
You're welcome. Do some experimenting. Try things that might seem a little unusual.
Partway in it, we'll give a beep if you want to have raisins or nuts or something.
Yes, that's at the beginning of the second beating cycle. And you can, if you,
So you could put
I've
like, you
never
could put
tried
like
adding raisins
sunflower,
to this.
you could put sunflower seeds or something like that in it
Sunflower
too.
seeds. I have used sunflower seeds in this batch. I usually put them in at the beginning simply because then I don't have to be close enough to hear the bell when it rings.
Right.
But if you're, if you want to make raisin bread or something like that, you'd probably want to add that at that second time. The bread maker does the rest of it. Like I say, it's got a weak point, but I found a way around that for the time being at least. Okay, thank you very much.
I like especially when you